The morning Isaac Quinn watched his ranch burn to ashes, he thought his life was over at 26 years old, standing in the Nevada dust with nothing but the scorched clothes on his back and the acrid taste of failure in his mouth. The fire had started 3 nights ago during the worst drought Winnemucca had seen in 15 years. Isaac had been checking the southern fence line when he saw the orange glow against the black sky, and by the time he got back, the barn was already engulfed. He tried to save what he could, releasing the horses from their stalls, watching them scatter into the night. The house went next, the flames leaping from building to building with a hunger that seemed almost personal. He fought it until dawn with buckets from the well, but it was like trying to hold back the ocean with his bare hands. By sunrise, everything his father had built over 30 years was gone. Now, 5 days later, Isaac stood among the wreckage. The smell of burnt wood still hung heavy in the air, mixing with the desert heat that shimmered off the blackened timbers. He kicked at a piece of charred lumber that had once been part of his kitchen table. The bank had already sent word that they expected payments to continue, fire or no fire. He had maybe 2 months before they took the land itself. He heard the wagon before he saw it, the familiar creak of wood and the steady clip of hooves on the hard-packed road. Isaac looked up, squinting against the late morning sun. A single wagon was approaching, pulled by 2 sturdy draft horses. As it got closer, he could make out a woman driving, sitting straight-backed on the bench seat, her dark hair pulled back under a wide-brimmed hat. The wagon bed was loaded with something covered by canvas. Isaac wiped the soot from his hands onto his already filthy pants and walked toward the road. He did not recognize the wagon or the woman, and strangers did not usually come out this far unless they were lost or looking for work. As she pulled the horses to a stop at the edge of his property, he got his first good look at her. She was young, probably close to his own age, with suntan skin and dark eyes that took in the destruction with a calm assessment that surprised him. She was pretty in a practical way, no fancy dress or painted face, just a simple cotton shirt and riding skirt. There was something determined in the set of her jaw that made Isaac stand a little straighter despite his exhaustion. "This the Quinn place?" she asked, her voice clear and direct. "What is left of it?" Isaac said, trying to keep the bitterness out of his tone. "I am Isaac Quinn. Can I help you with something?" The woman set the brake and climbed down from the wagon with practiced ease. She walked right up to him, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes, and extended her hand. "Grace Reeves. I heard in town what happened. Came to help." Isaac stared at her offered hand, confused. "Help how?" Grace looked past him at the ruins, then back at his face. "Rebuild it. You have got land, you have got a well that survived, and from what I can see, your foundation stones are still good. What you need is lumber, nails, and hands willing to work. I have brought the first 2, and I am offering the third." For a moment, Isaac could only stand there, trying to make sense of her words. "You do not even know me." "No," Grace agreed, finally lowering her hand since he had not taken it. "But I know what it is like to lose everything and have nobody offer to help. I know what it is like to stand in the ashes and wonder if you have got the strength to start over. And I know that good land like this should not go to waste because one man cannot do alone what takes a dozen." "I cannot pay you," Isaac said bluntly. "I can barely feed myself right now." "Did I ask for payment?" Grace walked back to her wagon and began untying the canvas. "I have got lumber here, bought and paid for from the mill in town. I have got tools, nails, and a strong back. What I need from you is to stop standing there looking like a whipped dog and help me unload this wagon." Isaac felt something shift inside him, some locked door that had been sealed shut since the fire. He did not know who this woman was or why she really came, but she was here, and she was offering something he desperately needed, which was hope. "All right," he said quietly. "All right, let us see what you brought." They spent the rest of the morning unloading the wagon. Grace had not exaggerated. She had brought fresh-cut pine boards, bundles of shingles, 3 crates of nails in various sizes, 2 new saws, a hammer, a level, and even a box of supplies, including coffee, beans, salt pork, and flour. It was more than Isaac could have afforded even before the fire. "How did you pay for all this?" he asked as they stacked the lumber in a clear area away from the burnt debris. Grace was quiet for a moment, setting down her end of a long board. "I sold my wagon and team. The ones I am driving now, I am borrowing from the livery. Need to have them back by Sunday." Isaac straightened up, staring at her. You sold your wagon? Your own wagon and horses? They were just sitting there, Grace said with a shrug that tried to be casual. I have been staying at the boarding house in town since I got to Winnemucca 3 weeks ago. Was not like I was using them. 3 weeks, Isaac repeated. You have been here 3 weeks and you spent your money, your wagon, everything on a stranger's ranch? Grace met his eyes steadily. Like I said, I know what it is like. Before Isaac could respond, she turned and headed back to the wagon. He watched her go, this strange woman who had appeared out of nowhere, with exactly what he needed at exactly the right moment. Part of him wanted to refuse, to send her away and figure this out on his own. But the larger part, the practical part that had kept this ranch running through drought and hard winters, knew that pride was a luxury he could not afford. They worked through the afternoon, clearing the burnt debris from what had been the house. It was hard, dirty work, and Isaac found himself watching Grace out of the corner of his eye. She did not complain about the heat or the soot or the splinters. She just worked, steady and determined, asking intelligent questions about where things had been and how he wanted to rebuild. We should start with a small cabin, Grace said, as they took a break in the shade of her wagon. She passed him a canteen of water, and he drank gratefully. Something big enough to live in while we work on the rest. 4 walls, a roof, a stove, and a bed. Once you have got shelter, we can think about the barn and the other outbuildings. That makes sense, Isaac agreed. He wiped his mouth and handed back the canteen. Grace, why are you really doing this? She took a drink herself, her eyes looking out over the ruined ranch toward the distant mountains. I came to Nevada from Missouri 6 months ago, she said finally. My parents died of fever last winter. We had a farm there, small but good. After they passed, my uncle decided the land should be his. He had debts, you see, and our farm was worth something. He went to a judge he knew, told him my father had borrowed money years ago that was never repaid. It was a lie, but the judge believed him, or pretended to. Either way, I was put out with nothing but what I could carry. Isaac felt anger rise in his chest, hot and protective. That is not right. No, Grace agreed. But it is legal if you know the right people and have the right documents, real or not. I tried to fight it, but I did not have money for a good lawyer, and nobody was going to take the word of a 23-year-old girl over a respected businessman and a county judge. So you came here. So I came here, Grace echoed. Thought I might start fresh, maybe find work as a seamstress or a teacher. But everywhere I went, it was the same story. No work for a woman alone, no opportunities, just pity and propositions. The boarding house owner, Mrs. Chen, she is kind. But I could see my money running out and no prospects coming in. Then I heard about your fire, and I thought, here is something I can do. Here is someone who needs help as much as I need a purpose. Isaac studied her face, the determined set of her jaw, the way her hands gripped the canteen like she was holding onto a lifeline. You are planning to stay then, help rebuild, and then what? Work the ranch? Grace turned to look at him directly. I am planning to offer you a partnership. You have got land and knowledge. I have got a strong back and a head for figures. Between us, we could make this place work again. Split the profits fair, build something that cannot be taken away by lawyers or liars. It was a bold proposition, maybe even a crazy one. Isaac did not know this woman, did not know if he could trust her, or if she would even last a week once the real work began. But he also knew that she was right. Alone, he would lose everything within 2 months. Together, they at least had a chance. Partnership, he said slowly. Equal say in decisions? Equal say, Grace confirmed. And separate living quarters once we get things built up. Of course. A hint of a smile touched her lips. I did not come here looking for a husband, Mr. Quinn. I came here looking for a future. Isaac stood up and extended his hand properly this time. Then let us shake on it, Miss Reeves. Partners. Grace took his hand, her grip firm and calloused. Partners. They worked until the sun began to set, laying out the dimensions of the cabin and sorting the lumber by length. Isaac found himself talking more than he had in weeks, explaining the layout of the old ranch, his plans for the herd once he could afford to buy more cattle, the way the creek ran full in spring and provided irrigation for a small garden plot. Grace listened and asked questions, good questions that showed she was thinking about the future, not just the immediate crisis. As the light faded, They used some of the unburned wood from the ruins to build a small fire. Grace produced a coffee pot from her supplies, and soon they were sitting on cleared ground, eating simple beans and biscuit, drinking strong coffee, and watching the stars come out over Nevada. "I should head back to town," Grace said eventually. "Need to return the wagon and horses, and I am expected back at the boarding house." "You could stay," Isaac said, then quickly clarified when he saw her expression. "I mean, there is no sense making that trip every day. We could set up a tent for you, keep things proper, would save time and wear on the horses." Grace considered this. "Mrs. Chen will worry. Send word with someone heading to town tomorrow. Let her know you were staying out here to work, that it is all respectable and proper." "And is it?" Grace asked, a challenge in her voice. "Respectable and proper?" "It will be," Isaac promised. "You have got my word on that. I am too tired and too grateful to be anything but a gentleman, Miss Reeves." Grace smiled then, a real smile that lit up her face. "All right, Mr. Quinn, I will stay, but I am holding you to that gentleman promise." They set up a simple camp that night. Isaac had a bedroll that had been in the barn and had escaped the fire. Grace had blankets in the wagon. They strung up a canvas between two of the remaining support posts to give her privacy, and Isaac made his bed on the other side of the clearing, a respectful distance away. As he lay there under the vast Nevada sky, listening to the distant cry of coyotes and the settling sounds of the camp, Isaac felt something he had not felt since the fire, which was not quite hope, but perhaps its close cousin. Tomorrow they would start building. Tomorrow they would begin turning ashes into something new. He fell asleep thinking about dark eyes and calloused hands, and the way Grace Reeves had looked at his ruined ranch and seen possibility instead of disaster. The next morning started before dawn. Isaac woke to the sound of someone moving around the camp and opened his eyes to see Grace already up, stoking the fire and setting the coffee pot on to boil. He rolled out of his blankets, every muscle protesting from the previous day's work. "Morning," Grace said without looking up. "Figured we should get an early start. Want to make the most of the cool hours before the heat sets in." Isaac stretched, feeling his spine pop. "You always wake up this early?" "Farm life," Grace said simply. "Cows do not care if you are tired." They ate a quick breakfast of leftover biscuits and coffee, then got to work. The first task was to finish clearing the foundation of what had been the house. The stones were blackened with soot, but still solid, set deep into the ground by Isaac's father 20 years ago. They scrubbed them as clean as they could, with sand and water from the well, then used the level to check that they were still true. "Your father built well," Grace observed, running her hand over the smooth stones. "These will hold for another 100 years." "He was particular about his work," Isaac said, feeling the familiar ache of loss. His father had died 2 years ago, thrown from a spooked horse. His mother had followed 6 months later, the doctor said, from pneumonia, but Isaac knew it was really from a broken heart. He always said, if you are going to do something, do it right the first time, because you might not get a second chance. Grace looked at him with understanding in her eyes. "He sounds like a good man." He was. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, measuring and cutting boards for the cabin's frame. Isaac had built enough structures around the ranch to know the basics of carpentry, and Grace surprised him by knowing almost as much. Her cuts were clean and precise, her measurements exact. "Where did you learn to do this?" Isaac asked as she expertly notched a beam. "My father," Grace said, focusing on her work. "He believed daughters should know everything sons know. Said the world was hard enough without being helpless. So he taught me carpentry, how to handle horses, how to read contracts and keep books. My mother taught me the rest, sewing and cooking and all that. Between them, they made sure I could take care of myself." "They sound like remarkable people." Grace's hands stilled on the wood for a moment. "They were. I miss them every day." By mid-morning, they had to stop and make the trip back to town to return the borrowed wagon and horses. They rode together on the bench seat, the empty wagon rattling behind them. The road to Winnemucca was dusty and rutted, winding through sagebrush and rocky outcroppings. The town itself was growing, buildings spreading out from the original main street as more people came looking for land and opportunity. They returned the wagon to the livery, where a grizzled man named Tom took the horses with a grunt. "Mrs. Chen been asking after you," he told Grace. "Said to send you her way when you got back." The boarding house was a 2-story building on the edge of town, painted white with a wide porch. Mrs. Chen herself answered the door, a small Chinese woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She looked from Grace to Isaac and back again, her expression unreadable. "Miss Reeves," she said. "Come in. You too, Mr. Quinn." They followed her into a tidy parlor. Mrs. Chen gestured for them to sit, then took a chair across from them. "I hear you are staying at the Quinn ranch now." "Yes, madam," Grace said. "Mr. Quinn and I have formed a partnership. I am helping him rebuild in exchange for a share in the ranch." Mrs. Chen's eyes sharpened. "A partnership. A business partnership," Isaac clarified quickly. "It is all proper, separate quarters, everything respectable." "Mm-hmm." Mrs. Chen did not look entirely convinced. "Miss Reeves, you paid through the end of the month. Do you want your money back for the unused days?" Grace hesitated, and Isaac could see her doing calculations in her head. Money was clearly tight, but before Grace could answer, Isaac spoke up. "How much for the rest of the month?" Mrs. Chen named a figure. It was more than Isaac had in his pockets, but not impossible. "What if we need to come to town occasionally? Could Miss Reeves still have the room, even if she is not here every night?" "The room is paid for," Mrs. Chen said. "She can use it or not as she pleases. But, Mr. Quinn, I will tell you plainly, I have known too many young women who went out to work on remote ranches and came back in trouble or did not come back at all. Miss Reeves is a good girl, and I will not see her taken advantage of." "Neither will I," Isaac said firmly. "You have my word as a man, and if that is not enough, you can ask Reverend Matthews to ride out and check on things any time you like." Mrs. Chen studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I will hold you to that. And, Miss Reeves, you come to town every Sunday at least. I want to see with my own eyes that you are well." "Yes, madam," Grace said, and Isaac could hear the relief and gratitude in her voice. "Thank you." They left the boarding house with Grace's few extra belongings in a carpet bag and headed to the general store. Isaac needed supplies they could not afford, but Grace had been practical, and they made a careful list of absolute necessities: more food, a proper tent for Grace, lamp oil, and a few tools they were still missing. The storekeeper, Mr. Hastings, was a balding man with suspicious eyes. He looked at their list and named a price that made Isaac wince. "I can offer credit," Hastings said, though his tone suggested he did not expect Isaac to take it. "With the fire and all, I imagine cash is tight." "How much interest?" Grace asked before Isaac could respond. Hastings blinked, clearly surprised to be addressed by the woman. 10% monthly." "That is robbery," Grace said flatly. 5%, or we take our business to Carson City." "Carson City is 2 days' ride from here," Hastings protested. "And we have got time," Grace countered. "But you do not have many customers who need this much in supplies. 5%, and you get paid as the ranch starts producing again. Refuse, and you get nothing." Isaac watched in amazement as Grace negotiated, her voice never rising, but her determination absolute. In the end, Hastings agreed to 6%, and they left with their supplies and a credit agreement written out in Grace's neat handwriting, signed by both parties. "Where did you learn to do that?" Isaac asked, as they loaded the supplies into a rented wagon for the trip back. Grace grinned. "My father used to trade horses. You do not survive in that business by accepting the first offer. Besides, Hastings was trying to take advantage because he thinks you are desperate. Men like that need to be reminded that they are not the only option." They stopped at the lumber mill to arrange for more wood to be delivered, paid for with another credit agreement. Then they visited the blacksmith to price new tools for when they could afford them. By the time they headed back to the ranch, the sun was past its peak, and they had a wagon full of supplies and a much clearer picture of what they were up against. "It is going to be tight," Isaac said as they drove. "Even with the credit, we are looking at months before we can bring in any income. I had 12 head of cattle before the fire. They scattered when it started. I have seen a few around, but I would be surprised if we found more than half." "So we start small," Grace said. "Find what cattle we can, rebuild the basics, and work our way up. Rome was not built in a day, Mr. Quinn." "Isaac," he said. "If we are partners, you should call me Isaac." Grace smiled. "All right, Isaac, and you should call me Grace." "Grace," he repeated, and liked the way it sounded. They spent the next 2 weeks in a blur of constant work. The cabin took shape slowly, board by board, nail by nail. They worked from first light until they could no longer see, their hands blistering and healing and blistering again. Isaac found himself constantly aware of Grace's presence, the way she moved with efficiency and purpose, the sound of her humming old songs while she worked, the furrow between her brows when she was concentrating on a difficult cut. She was unlike any woman he had ever known. The few girls he had courted in the past had been town girls, more interested in dances and pretty dresses than hard work. Grace was different. She matched him hour for hour, never complaining, never asking for special treatment. When she did not know how to do something, she asked, learned, and then did it. When she knew a better way, she said so without apology. They fell into a routine. Wake before dawn, start the fire, make coffee. Work until mid-morning, then break for a simple meal. Work through the heat of the day, taking turns fetching water from the well. Another break in the late afternoon, then work until dark. Supper by firelight, talking through plans for the next day, then sleep and do it all again. The cabin's walls went up, rough pine boards that still smelled of sap and sawdust. They cut windows, proper ones that could be shuttered against wind and cold. The roof was harder, requiring them to haul heavy beams and work high off the ground. But Grace proved to have no fear of heights, scrambling up ladders with the same confidence she showed on the ground. On a Saturday afternoon, as they were nailing down the last of the roof shingles, Grace suddenly laughed, a sound of pure joy that made Isaac look up from his work. "What is it?" he called across the roof. Grace stood up, balancing easily on the peak, and spread her arms wide. "Look at this, Isaac. Look at what we built. 2 weeks ago, this was just ashes and stones. Now it is a cabin. We did this." Isaac climbed up to stand beside her, and together they looked out over their work. The cabin was small, just one room with a loft for sleeping, but it was solid and real. Beyond it, the cleared spaces where the barn and other buildings would eventually stand. Further out, the land itself, harsh and beautiful under the Nevada sun. "We did," Isaac agreed, and felt something warm spread through his chest. He glanced at Grace, saw her face flushed with exertion and pride, her dark hair escaping from its braid to curl around her face, and felt his heart do something complicated in his chest. She turned and caught him looking, and for a moment, they just stood there, balanced on top of their half-finished cabin, the wind blowing around them. Something passed between them, unspoken but real, and Isaac saw Grace's expression shift, her smile faltering into something more uncertain, more aware. "We should finish up," Grace said finally, breaking the moment. "Want to get this roof done before dark?" "Right," Isaac said, not moving. "Before dark." Grace climbed back down to her section of roof, and Isaac forced himself to focus on the shingles in front of him. But he was aware, suddenly and acutely, that something had changed between them. Or maybe it had been changing all along, and he was only just now allowing himself to notice. That night, after they had finished the roof and were eating supper by the fire, Grace said, "We should go to town tomorrow. It is Sunday, and I promised Mrs. Chen." "Of course," Isaac agreed. "We could both use a day of rest anyway. Maybe attend service, let people see we are doing things proper." Grace nodded, poking at the fire with a stick. "Isaac, can I ask you something?" "Sure. Do you ever regret it, agreeing to this partnership with a stranger?" Isaac considered the question seriously. "No," he said finally. "I do not regret it. You saved this ranch, Grace. Saved me, really. I was about ready to give up when you showed up with that wagon. Why? Do you regret it?" "No," Grace said quietly. "But I wonder sometimes what you must think of me. A woman alone, with nothing to her name, coming out here and forcing herself into your life." "You did not force anything," Isaac said firmly. "You offered help when I needed it most, and you have worked harder than any person I have ever known. I think you are brave and smart and stronger than you have any right to be." He paused, then added more softly, "I think I am lucky you chose my ranch to show up at." Grace looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "I am glad I came," she said. "I am glad it was you." The air between them felt charged, full of things unsaid. Isaac wanted to reach across the fire, take her hand, say more, but he held back. They had an agreement, a partnership, and he would not complicate that by pushing for something she might not want. Still, as he lay in his bedroll that night, he could not stop thinking about the way she had looked standing on that roof, arms spread wide, laughing at the sky. Sunday morning, they rode to town together on Isaac's horse, one of the few that had come back after the fire. Grace sat behind him, her arms around his waist for balance, and Isaac tried very hard not to think about how right it felt to have her there. Church was held in a white clapboard building at the north end of town. Reverend Matthews was a stern-faced man who preached fire and brimstone, but his wife was kind and the congregation was welcoming enough. Isaac and Grace sat in a back pew, very aware of the glances and whispers around them. After the service, Mrs. Matthews approached them with a warm smile. "Mr. Quinn, I was so sorry to hear about your ranch. How are you managing?" "We are rebuilding, madam," Isaac said, including Grace in the statement. "This is Grace Reeves. She is my business partner." "Business partner," Mrs. Matthews repeated, her eyebrows rising. "How modern. And are you staying at the ranch, Miss Reeves?" "I am," Grace said, meeting the older woman's eyes steadily. "We have separate accommodations, all very proper. I am helping with the construction and planning." "I see." Mrs. Matthews' expression was thoughtful rather than judgmental. "Well, if you need anything, Miss Reeves, or if you need somewhere to stay in town, our door is always open. It is good to see people helping each other out here. The Lord knows the West is hard enough without facing it alone." They had lunch at the boarding house with Mrs. Chen, who looked Grace over carefully and seemed satisfied with what she saw. "You look healthy," she said. "Working hard, I can see, but eating enough and sleeping? Good." "Isaac takes good care that everything is proper," Grace said. "And the work is hard but satisfying. We finished the cabin roof yesterday." "A cabin," Mrs. Chen said. "Just one room?" "For now," Isaac explained. "Once it is done, we will start on the barn and other buildings. But we need shelter first, before the weather turns." Mrs. Chen nodded approvingly. "Practical. That is good. Too many people out here try to build everything at once and end up with nothing finished when winter comes." They spent the afternoon in town, picking up a few more supplies and letting Isaac's horse rest before the ride back. As they walked down the main street, they passed a group of men standing outside the saloon. One of them, a large man with a red face and mean eyes, called out as they passed. "That you, Quinn? Heard your ranch burned down. Shame about that." Isaac recognized him as Dale Crimson, who owned a spread to the west. They had never gotten along. "It is being rebuilt," Isaac said evenly, trying to walk past. "With a woman helping?" Crimson laughed, and his friends joined in. "What kind of man needs a woman to do his building for him?" Isaac felt Grace tense beside him and put a hand on her arm. "The smart kind," he said calmly. "Good day, Crimson." They kept walking, but Crimson called after them. "That your woman, Quinn, or is she available for hire? I could use some help around my place, too." Isaac stopped, his jaw clenching. Before he could turn around, Grace stepped in front of him, facing Crimson herself. "I am a business partner, not that it is any of your concern. And from what I hear in town, the only thing you need help with is paying your bar tab and treating your ranch hands with a shred of decency." Crimson's face went redder. "You watch your mouth, girl." "Or what?" Grace challenged. "You will insult me some more? Spread rumors? Men like you are all the same. Big talk, small character, and too much time on your hands because you are too lazy to do an honest day's work yourself." For a moment, Isaac thought Crimson might actually try to grab Grace, and he stepped up beside her, ready to intervene. But one of Crimson's friends put a hand on his arm. "Let it go, Dale. She is not worth it." Crimson spat in the dust. "You two deserve each other. Good luck making that ranch work, Quinn. You will need it." They walked away, Isaac's heart pounding. When they were out of earshot, he said, "You did not have to do that." "Yes, I did," Grace said firmly. "Men like Crimson prey on anyone they think is weak. You show them you are not, and they back down. My father taught me that too." Isaac looked at her with new respect. "You are full of surprises, Grace Reeves." "So are you, Isaac Quinn," she said with a small smile. "So are you." They rode back to the ranch in the golden light of late afternoon, and Isaac found himself very aware of Grace's presence behind him, her arms around his waist, her chin occasionally resting against his shoulder. It felt domestic, comfortable, like they had been doing this for years instead of weeks. When they got back, the cabin stood waiting for them, the fresh lumber glowing in the sunset. Their cabin, built together from nothing. Isaac helped Grace down from the horse and found himself reluctant to let go of her hand. "Grace," he started, not sure what he wanted to say. She looked up at him, something uncertain and hopeful in her eyes. "Yes?" Before Isaac could find the words, a shout came from the direction of the creek. They both turned to see a man on horseback riding toward them, waving his hat. As he got closer, Isaac recognized Sam Porter, who owned a small ranch to the south. "Isaac," Sam called as he pulled up. "Glad I found you home. I have got 6 of your cattle down by my south pasture. Saw your brand on them. Want to come collect them tomorrow?" 6? Isaac felt a surge of hope. "That is more than I thought we would find." "Yes, absolutely. I will be there first thing in the morning." Sam tipped his hat to Grace. "Madam, heard you were helping out Isaac here. That is real kind of you." "Just being neighborly," Grace said. After Sam left, Isaac turned to Grace with a grin. 6 head. That is almost half of what we had. If we can find a few more, we might actually have the start of a herd again. Grace smiled back, caught up in his excitement. "That is wonderful news. See, things are starting to turn around." They celebrated with a better supper than usual, using some of the supplies they had brought from town. As they ate, they talked about what 6 cattle could mean, how they could grow the herd, the timeline for getting the ranch productive again. But underneath the practical talk, Isaac was aware of the unfinished moment between them, the words he had been about to say before Sam interrupted. Later, as they were banking the fire for the night, Grace said, "Isaac, earlier you were about to say something, before Sam showed up." Isaac's heart kicked up. "I was." "What was it?" He looked at her across the dying fire, her face half in shadow, half in light. "I was going to say that I am glad you are here, not just for the work, though God knows I could not do this without you, but for you. I am glad you are here, Grace." Grace was quiet for a long moment. Then she said softly, "I am glad I am here too, and not just for the ranch. For you, Isaac." The words hung between them, an acknowledgement of something neither of them had been willing to name before. Isaac wanted to go to her, to cross the space between them, but he held back. They had time. They were building something together, and it was worth doing right. "Good night, Grace," he said. "Good night, Isaac," she replied. And they went to their separate sleeping areas, both thinking about the other in the darkness. The next weeks passed in a blur of progress. Isaac collected his cattle from Sam Porter and found 3 more wandering in the hills. 9 head was not much, but it was enough to rebuild from. Grace finished the interior of the cabin, while Isaac started work on a simple barn. The structure was nowhere near as grand as the one that had burned, but it would keep the animals safe and the hay dry, which was all that mattered. As they worked, Isaac found himself falling into a rhythm with Grace that felt as natural as breathing. They learned each other's habits and preferences, developed their own shorthand for communication. Grace liked her coffee strong in the morning. Isaac worked better with music, so Grace sang while they built. Old hymns and folk songs that made the work go faster. They argued sometimes about the best way to do things, but they learned to compromise, to listen to each other's reasons. The weather began to cool as September arrived, the brutal heat of summer giving way to crisp mornings and pleasant afternoons. The cabin was finished now, complete with a proper door, glass windows Isaac had traded work for in town, and a small stove for heat and cooking. Grace insisted on making curtains, spending her evenings sewing by lamplight, while Isaac worked on repairing tools or planning the next day's work. One evening, as they sat outside the cabin watching the stars come out, Grace said, "We should think about winter. It comes early in Nevada, and it can be harsh." "I know," Isaac said. "We need more hay stored, more wood for the fire, and the barn needs to be finished before the first snow." "I was thinking," Grace said carefully, "that I should probably move into the cabin for the winter. The tent will not hold up in a blizzard, and it will be too cold." Isaac's heart jumped, but he kept his voice calm. "That makes sense. We can hang a curtain down the middle, give you privacy. The loft is big enough for me to sleep up there. Are you sure? I do not want to make things uncomfortable." "Grace," Isaac said, turning to look at her, "you have been living in a tent for 2 months, working as hard as any man. If you need to be in the cabin for winter, then that is where you should be. Anyone who has a problem with that can answer to me." Grace smiled, and even in the dim light, Isaac could see the warmth in her expression. "Thank you. For everything, really. For trusting me, for treating me like an equal. I have never had that before." "You have earned it 100 times over," Isaac said. "I do not know what I did to deserve you showing up when you did, but I thank God for it every day." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Grace said, "Tell me about your family, your parents. You have mentioned your father built the ranch. but I do not know much more." Isaac leaned back, looking up at the vast spread of stars. "My father came out here in the 40s, during the emigration boom. He was from Ohio originally, son of a clerk, but he wanted land of his own. He and my mother traveled the Oregon Trail, but they split off in Nevada, decided this was where they wanted to settle, bought this land from a man who was giving up and heading back east. My mother was tough, had to be to survive out here. She could shoot as well as any man, rode like she was born on a horse. She taught me to read, kept the books for the ranch, ran the household. They were a good match, my parents, balanced each other." "You must miss them," Grace said softly. "Every day, especially at times like this. I wish they could see what we are doing, that the ranch is not dying after all." "I think they would be proud," Grace said. "I think they would be glad you did not give up." Isaac looked at her, this woman who had saved him in more ways than one. "What about you? Tell me more about Missouri, about your parents." Grace wrapped her arms around her knees, her gaze distant. "My father was a horseman, like I said. We were not rich, but we were comfortable. Our farm was small, but we had good breeding stock, and people came from 3 counties over to buy from us. My mother was a teacher before she married, and she never lost that love of learning. She taught me everything she knew, insisted I could read and write and figure as well as any boy." "They sound wonderful." "They were," Grace said, her voice thick. "Losing them was like losing my compass. Everything I knew about the world, about my place in it, was tied to that farm and to them. When my uncle took it all, it felt like he erased them, like their life's work meant nothing." Isaac reached over and took her hand, a gesture that felt natural now. "They are not erased. They are in you, in everything you do. The way you work, the way you think, the way you do not back down when things are hard. That is your parents living on." Grace squeezed his hand, and he saw tears glinting in her eyes. "Thank you. I needed to hear that." They stayed like that, hands linked, watching the stars wheel overhead. Isaac was aware that things were shifting between them again, that the line between business partners and something more was blurring. But he was not scared of it anymore. Whatever was growing between them felt right, like it was meant to happen. The barn took another month to complete, and by the time they nailed the last board in place, it was late October, and the mornings had frost on them. They stood together in the wide doorway, looking at the clean stalls and the loft already half filled with hay they had cut from the creek bottom. "It is not as big as the old one," Isaac said. "It is big enough," Grace replied, "and we built it ourselves. That means something." They moved the cattle into the barn that night, and Isaac felt a sense of accomplishment that had been missing since the fire. They had done it. Against all odds, they had rebuilt enough to survive the winter. The ranch was not what it had been, not yet, but it was alive again. That night, they had their first meal inside the cabin. Grace had made a proper stew with vegetables they had traded for in town, and the small space was warm and cozy with the stove going. Isaac sat at the table they had built together, watching Grace move around the cabin with comfortable familiarity, and thought that this felt like home in a way it had not even before the fire. "You are staring," Grace said, glancing at him with amusement. "And sorry, just thinking." "About what?" Isaac hesitated, then decided to be honest. "About how different things are now, how different I feel." Grace set down the spoon she was holding and came to sit across from him. "Different how?" "Before the fire, I was just going through the motions, running the ranch because it was what my father did, because it was expected. I was not unhappy, but I was not particularly happy either. I was just existing." He met her eyes. "Now, even though everything is harder, even though we are starting from almost nothing, I wake up every day glad to be alive. And that is because of you, Grace." Grace's breath caught. "Isaac, I know we agreed this was a business partnership," Isaac continued, the words spilling out now that he had started. "And I will honor that if it is what you want. But I need you to know that somewhere along the way, you became more than a partner to me. You became the person I think about when I wake up, and the last person I want to see before I sleep. You became my friend and my equal, and the woman I am falling in love with." The silence stretched between them, and Isaac's heart pounded. He had said it now, put his feelings out there where they could not be taken back. Grace just looked at him, her eyes wide and shining in the lamplight. I am sorry," Isaac said when she did not speak. "I should not have said anything. I do not want to make things awkward." "Stop," Grace said, holding up a hand. Just stop talking for a minute and let me think." Isaac closed his mouth, waiting, his heart in his throat. Grace stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the dark night. Then she turned back to face him. "When I left Missouri, I thought my life was over. I thought the best I could hope for was survival, maybe finding some kind of work that would keep me fed and housed. I did not think about happiness. I did not think about love. Those felt like luxuries I could not afford." She walked back to the table, placing her hands flat on the surface. "Then I heard about your fire, and something in me said this was my chance. Not just to help you, but to build something for myself. To prove I was worth more than my uncle thought, more than those town folk who looked at me with pity. I came here planning to work hard, earn my place, create a future I could be proud of." "You have done all that," Isaac said softly. "Yes," Grace agreed. "But I did not plan on this, on you, on the way you treat me like I have a brain in my head, on the way you make me laugh even when we are exhausted, on the way I started looking forward to every sunrise because it meant another day working beside you." She took a shaky breath. "I did not plan on falling in love with you, Isaac Quinn, but I did. I have been in love with you for weeks now, and I have been terrified to say anything because I did not want to ruin what we had." Isaac stood so fast his chair scraped backward. He moved around the table, and Grace met him halfway. They stood close enough to touch, looking at each other with new eyes, seeing not just the business partner or the friend, but the person each of them wanted to spend their life with. "Can I kiss you?" Isaac asked, his voice rough. "You better," Grace said, and then his lips were on hers, and it was like coming home. The kiss was sweet and searching, full of all the weeks of unspoken feelings. Isaac cupped Grace's face in his calloused hands, and she gripped his shirt like she was afraid he would disappear. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said again, needing her to hear it. "I love your strength and your stubbornness and the way you never give up." "I love you too," Grace whispered. "I love your kindness and your integrity and the way you see me as I really am." They kissed again, slower this time, exploring. Isaac thought about how strange life was, how the worst day of his life had led directly to the best thing that ever happened to him. If the fire had not come, Grace would not have either. He would still be alone, going through the motions, never knowing what it felt like to have a true partner in every sense of the word. When they finally pulled apart, Grace looked up at him with a mix of joy and uncertainty. "What do we do now?" "Now," Isaac said, "we keep building. The ranch, our life, whatever comes next. But we do it together, not just as partners, but as people who love each other." "People will talk," Grace warned, "about us living together, about impropriety." "Then we will get married," Isaac said simply. "I mean, if you will have me. I know this is fast, but Grace, I have never been more certain of anything in my life. You are who I want beside me, today and every day after." Grace's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "That is the worst proposal I have ever heard." Isaac laughed, feeling lighter than he had in months. "You were right. Let me try again." He took both her hands in his. "Grace Reeves, you showed up at my lowest moment and gave me hope. You worked beside me and challenged me and made me want to be better. You made me fall in love with life again, and with you. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Not because it is proper or expected, but because I cannot imagine my future without you in it." "Yes," Grace said, the tears spilling over now. "Yes, Isaac, I will marry you." He picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing and crying at the same time. When he set her down, they kissed again, and it felt like a promise, a seal on the future they would build together. They spent the rest of the evening making plans, practical and romantic at once. They would go to town at the end of the week, talk to Reverend Matthews about getting married. It did not need to be a big affair, just a simple ceremony with a few witnesses. They would continue building the ranch together, but now, as husband and wife, a proper partnership in every way. As the night grew late, Isaac climbed up to the loft. That would be his sleeping space until the wedding, but he felt no frustration at the separation. They had time now, a whole life stretching ahead of them. A few weeks of propriety was a small price to pay for a future together. The next Sunday, they rode to town together with news to share. Mrs. Chen was the first to know, and she surprised them both by pulling Grace into a tight hug. "I am happy for you," she said. "You have found a good man, and he has found his match." Reverend Matthews agreed to marry them on the first Sunday of November, which gave them 3 weeks to prepare. The news spread through Winnemucca quickly, and the reaction was mostly positive. A few raised eyebrows, some speculation about the speed of the courtship, but most people seemed genuinely happy that Isaac had found someone after his losses. Dale Crimson, predictably, had something ugly to say when they crossed paths outside the general store. "Guess you found a way to keep your free labor, Quinn. Real smart, marrying the help." Isaac started forward, but Grace squeezed his arm. "He is not worth it," she said calmly, then turned to Crimson herself. "Actually, Mr. Crimson, Isaac is marrying his equal partner, not his help. But I would not expect you to understand the difference, seeing as how you have never treated anyone as an equal in your life." Crimson's face reddened, but before he could respond, Mr. Hastings came out of the store. "Crimson, did you come to settle your account? Because you are 3 months overdue, and I am about to cut off your credit." As Crimson sputtered, Isaac and Grace walked away, hiding their smiles. "You really do know how to handle men like that," Isaac said admiringly. "Practice," Grace said, "unfortunately." The weeks before the wedding were busy ones. They continued working on the ranch, preparing for winter, while also trying to make the cabin more suitable for 2 people sharing it as husband and wife. Isaac built a proper bed frame, using some of his best remaining wood. Grace sewed new curtains and tablecloths, little touches that made the space feel more like a home. Mrs. Matthews donated her own wedding dress for Grace to alter, and a few of the town women organized a small party to help with preparations. Grace was surprised and touched by the gesture, having expected to face more judgment. But Mrs. Chen, who had vouched for Grace to the other women, told her, "People out here understand that life is hard and love is rare. When you find it, you grab hold and do not let go. That is what you and Isaac are doing, and folks respect that." The night before the wedding, Isaac stayed in town at the boarding house while Grace remained at the ranch. It felt strange to be apart after months of constant proximity, and Isaac found himself restless, unable to settle. He ended up sitting in the boarding house parlor with Mrs. Chen, drinking tea and watching the late evening traffic on the street. "You are nervous," Mrs. Chen observed. "A little," Isaac admitted. "Not about marrying Grace, I am certain about that. Just about whether I can give her the life she deserves." "Mrs.?" Chen looked at him with her sharp, knowing eyes. "Miss Reeves, Grace as she will be Mrs. Quinn. She did not come to you looking for an easy life. She came looking for a life she could build with her own hands, alongside someone who respected her. You have given her that. The rest, the money and success and comfort, those things will come or they will not. But as long as you have respect and partnership and love, you will be richer than most." Isaac let those words sink in, feeling their truth. "Thank you," he said, "for looking after her when she first came to town, for trusting me with her." "I trust her," Mrs. Chen corrected. "She chose you. That was enough for me." The wedding took place on a clear, cold November morning. The church was full, more people than Isaac had expected, all dressed in their Sunday best. Grace walked down the aisle on the arm of Tom from the livery, who had volunteered to give her away, and Isaac forgot to breathe. She wore the altered wedding dress, simple white cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. Her dark hair was loose around her shoulders, and she carried a small bouquet of late wildflowers. But it was her face that stopped Isaac's heart, the way she looked at him with such love and certainty that he knew, absolutely knew, they were doing the right thing. The ceremony was simple and traditional. They spoke their vows clearly, promising to love and honor each other in sickness and health, poverty and prosperity, for as long as they both lived. When Reverend Matthews pronounced them husband and wife, Isaac kissed Grace in front of the whole town, sealing the promise they had made. The congregation held a small reception in the church hall afterward, with food donated by various families and music provided by a fiddler who played at all the town celebrations. Isaac and Grace danced together, Grace's head on Isaac's shoulder, both of them grinning like fools. "Mrs. Quinn," Isaac said, testing out the name. "Mr. Quinn," Grace replied, looking up at him. "Husband." "Wife," Isaac said, and kissed her again to the cheers of their friends and neighbors. They left the reception in the late afternoon, riding back to the ranch together on Isaac's horse. The sun was setting by the time they arrived, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The cabin stood waiting for them, smoke rising from the chimney where they had left a fire burning low. Isaac helped Grace down, and they stood for a moment looking at what they had built together. The cabin, the barn, the corrals, all of it created from ashes and hope and hard work. And now they would build something more, a marriage, a family, a future. "Welcome home, Mrs. Quinn," Isaac said. Grace smiled and took his hand. "I am already home. I have been since the day I showed up with that wagon full of tools." They went inside together, closing the door on the outside world. The cabin was warm and inviting, the lamp already lit, the bed they had built together covered with a new quilt Grace had made. Isaac pulled Grace close, and she came willingly, her arms going around his neck. "I love you," he said against her hair. "I love you too," Grace replied, "now and always." They made love that night with the tenderness of people who truly knew each other, who had built trust and friendship before passion. It was sweet and awkward and perfect, full of laughter and whispered words, and when they finally fell asleep in each other's arms, Isaac thought he had never been happier. Winter came hard that year, with snow starting in mid-November and continuing through March. But the cabin was tight and warm, the barn protected the animals, and Isaac and Grace had stockpiled enough supplies to last. They spent the long, dark evenings by the fire, planning improvements for spring, reading aloud from the few books they owned, learning the rhythms of married life. It was not always easy. They were both strong-willed, both used to making their own decisions. They argued about the best way to manage money, about when to sell cattle and when to hold them, about a dozen small things that married people argue about. But they always talked it through, always listened to each other's reasoning, and always went to bed reconciled. By the time spring arrived, melting the snow and turning the land green again, Grace was pregnant. She told Isaac one April morning, as they were checking on the new calves that had been born over the winter. "I am going to have a baby," she said simply. "In late summer, I think." Isaac just stared at her for a moment, the words not quite computing. Then a huge grin spread across his face. "A baby? We are going to have a baby? Unless you know some other way this happens," Grace said, but she was grinning too. Isaac picked her up and spun her around, just like he had the night they got engaged. "We are going to have a baby." They celebrated that night with a special dinner and quiet plans for the future. They would need to build an addition to the cabin, a separate room for the baby. They would need to be more careful about money, about planning. But Isaac felt nothing but joy, imagining a child with Grace's dark eyes and determination, a new generation to carry on what they were building. The pregnancy agreed with Grace, and she worked right alongside Isaac through the spring and early summer, only slowing down in the last months. They built the new room together, Isaac doing the heavy work, while Grace directed and helped where she could. They painted the walls with whitewash and built a cradle from pine, sanding it smooth so no rough edges would scratch tender skin. In late August, as the heat of summer began to break, Grace went into labor. Mrs. Chen had come out from town a week earlier to help, and she took charge with the calm competence that came from delivering many babies. Isaac paced outside, listening to Grace's cries and feeling helpless, until Mrs. Chen finally called him in. "You have a son," she said, placing the squalling baby in his arms. Healthy and loud, just like his mother. Isaac looked down at the tiny face, red and wrinkled and furious at the world, and felt his heart expand in a way he had not known was possible. "A son?" he whispered. "Grace, we have a son." Grace, exhausted but smiling, reached out to touch the baby's hand. "He is perfect. What should we name him?" They had discussed names for months, but now that the baby was here, Isaac knew exactly what felt right. "Thomas," he said, "after your father, Thomas Quinn." Grace's eyes filled with tears. Thomas? Yes, he would have loved that. Baby Thomas was an easy child, content to sleep and nurse and watch the world with serious dark eyes. Grace recovered quickly from the birth, and soon they were back to their routine, with the addition of a baby sleeping in his cradle or tied to Grace's back while she worked. The ranch continued to grow. They bought more cattle with money saved from selling calves. They added chickens for eggs and a milk cow. Isaac built a proper smokehouse and expanded the barn. By the time Thomas was walking, the ranch was producing enough that they could pay off their debts and even put a little money aside. Life settled into a rhythm that felt right. Seasons turned, each bringing its own work and challenges. They had good years and hard years, times of plenty and times of scarcity. They had 3 more children over the next 10 years, a daughter they named Ellen after Isaac's mother, another son they called James, and finally another daughter, little Margaret, who had her mother's determination even as a toddler. The cabin expanded to accommodate their growing family, rooms added one at a time, as needs and resources allowed. The ranch prospered, becoming known throughout the region for quality cattle and fair dealing. Isaac served on the town council for a few years, and Grace started a school in Winnemucca for children whose families lived too far out to attend regularly. Dale Crimson lost his ranch to the bank eventually, his poor management and worse reputation catching up to him. Isaac and Grace bought some of his land at auction, expanding their own holdings. They took no pleasure in his downfall, but they did not mourn it either. Some people made their own bad fortune, Grace said, and Crimson had been making his for years. On their 20th anniversary, Isaac and Grace stood on the porch of their now substantial ranch house, watching the sun set over land they had built together. The original cabin was still there, used now as a bunkhouse for the ranch hands they employed. The barn had been replaced twice, each time bigger than the last. Corrals and outbuildings stretched in all directions, and the brand of the Quinn Ranch was known and respected. "Do you remember the day we met?" Isaac asked, his arm around Grace's shoulders. She was 43 now, her dark hair streaked with silver, her hands still calloused from work, but her eyes as bright as ever. "I remember a man standing in ashes, looking like he had lost everything," Grace said. "I remember thinking I could help, if he would let me." "Best decision I ever made, letting you help," Isaac said. "Best day of my life, when you showed up with that wagon full of tools." "Second best," Grace corrected, leaning into him. "The best was the day you told me you loved me. Everything else followed from that." They stood in comfortable silence, watching their children play in the yard. Thomas was 22 now, already running half the ranch operations. Ellen was 19, engaged to a good man from town. James at 16 was horse mad, always trading and training, and Margaret, 12 years old and fierce, was probably planning some mischief that would have them both laughing and lecturing by bedtime. "We did good," Isaac said. "Built something that will last." "We did," Grace agreed. "Not bad for a man who lost everything and a woman who had nothing." Isaac turned to look at his wife, his partner, his love. 20 years had not dimmed his feelings for her. If anything, they had deepened, matured into something richer and more complex than that first passionate love. "I would do it all again," he said. "Every hard moment, every struggle, if it meant ending up here with you." Grace smiled and kissed him, a kiss full of 20 years of partnership and passion, of building and fighting and loving and living. "So would I," she said, "every single moment." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the Nevada sky in brilliant colors, they went inside together. The house smelled of cooking food and old wood, of life and family and home. The children came in for dinner, talking over each other about their days, and Isaac and Grace sat at the head of the table they had built together, holding hands beneath it, while they blessed the food and the family and the life they had created from ashes. That night, lying in bed with Grace's head on his shoulder, Isaac thought back to that terrible morning when he watched his ranch burn. He remembered the despair, the certainty that everything was over, and then he remembered the sound of wagon wheels, the sight of a determined woman with dark eyes and a plan, the words that changed everything. "Let's rebuild it together." "What are you thinking about?" Grace murmured, half asleep. "How lucky I am," Isaac said. "How grateful." "Me too," Grace said, and squeezed his hand. They fell asleep like that, as they had for 20 years, hands linked, hearts joined, two people who had found each other at exactly the right moment and built something that would outlast them both. The ranch would continue, passed down through generations, but more than that, the love they had discovered in the ashes would endure, a testament to the power of hope and hard work and showing up when someone needed you most. Outside, the Nevada night spread vast and star-filled over the Quinn Ranch, over the land they had saved and rebuilt and made their own. And in the morning, they would wake and work and live and love some more, because that was what they did, what they had always done since the day Grace Reeves showed up with tools and said 5 words that changed 2 lives forever. "Let's rebuild it together." The years continued to pass with the steady rhythm of ranch life. Thomas married a smart young woman named Sarah from town, and they gave Isaac and Grace their first grandchild, a boy named Isaac Jr. Ellen married her beau and moved to Carson City, where she opened a dress shop that became quite successful. James eventually started his own horse breeding operation on a portion of the Quinn land, and Margaret, true to her fierce nature, became a teacher like her mother, running the school Grace had founded. Isaac and Grace grew older together, their bodies slowing, but their partnership as strong as ever. They still took their morning coffee together on the porch, still discussed ranch business as equals, still held hands when they walked through the property that held so many memories. On a warm September afternoon, when Isaac was 56 and Grace was 53, they rode out together to the place where the original cabin had stood before the fire. It was just a foundation now, the stones still visible in the grass. They dismounted and walked hand in hand through the ruins, remembering. "Sometimes I try to imagine what would have happened if the fire had never come," Isaac said, "if I had just kept running the ranch the way it was." "You would have been fine," Grace said. "Successful, probably." "But I would not have had you," Isaac said, turning to face her. "I would not have had this life, this family. I would have had existence, not living. The fire took everything, but it also made room for something better." "That is a generous way to look at tragedy," Grace said gently. "It is the truth. You taught me that, Grace. You taught me that what matters is not what gets taken away, but what you build from what is left. You showed me that with enough determination and love, you can make something beautiful from ashes." Grace's eyes misted. "We did it together." "Yes," Isaac agreed. "Together, always together." They stayed there for a while, standing in the place where Isaac's old life had ended and their new life had begun. Then they mounted their horses and rode back to the ranch house, where their children and grandchildren were gathering for Sunday dinner, a tradition Grace had insisted on and Isaac had come to treasure. The house was full of noise and laughter, children running through rooms, women in the kitchen preparing food, men on the porch discussing cattle prices and weather. Isaac stood in the doorway, watching it all, and felt Grace slip her hand into his. "This is what we built," she said softly. "Not just a ranch, but this. Family, legacy, love." "It is more than I ever dreamed of," Isaac said. "More than I deserve." "Nonsense," Grace said firmly. "You deserve every bit of happiness, Isaac Quinn, and I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure you have it." They went inside together, into the warmth and chaos of their family, and Isaac knew with absolute certainty that his life had turned out exactly as it was meant to. The fire had been terrible, the loss devastating, but it had also been the beginning of his greatest adventure, his truest happiness. Because on the morning after the worst night of his life, a woman with dark eyes and a wagon load of tools had appeared and offered him not just help, but hope. And in accepting that help, in building alongside her day after day, he had found not just a way to save his ranch, but a way to save himself. Grace Reeves, who became Grace Quinn, had shown up when he needed her most and stayed for a lifetime. Together, they had rebuilt more than structures and herds. They had built a partnership, a love story, a legacy that would endure long after the buildings crumbled and the land passed to new hands. As they sat down to dinner that Sunday evening, surrounded by the family they had created and the life they had built from nothing, Isaac reached over and squeezed Grace's hand. She squeezed back, and in that simple gesture was everything they had ever been to each other: partners, friends, lovers, builders of dreams. The meal was blessed, the food was shared, and the Quinn family gathered around the table that had been built by hand 30 years ago, when a man who had lost everything met a woman who gave him hope. And in the laughter and love that filled that room, the real legacy of Isaac and Grace Quinn lived on, not in land or cattle or buildings, but in the hearts of the people they had raised, and the love they had proven could grow even in the hardest soil. As the sun set on another day at the Quinn ranch, Isaac looked at his wife across the table and silently mouthed the words he had said 1,000 times and would say 1,000 more. "I love you." Grace smiled and mouthed back, "I love you too." And it was enough. It had always been enough. From that first day when she showed up with tools and determination, through all the years of building and growing and living, their love had been the foundation upon which everything else was built, and it would remain solid and unshakable until the day they drew their last breaths, and even beyond, carried on in the children and grandchildren who bore witness to what two people could create when they chose to rebuild together. The Quinn Ranch stood as it always had, weathering storms and seasons, a testament to vision and hard work. But more than that, it stood as proof that sometimes the worst moments in life can lead to the very best ones. If you are brave enough to accept help when it is offered, and wise enough to build something lasting with the person who shows up, tools in hand, ready to work beside you. Isaac and Grace had done exactly that, and in doing so, they had created not just a successful ranch, but a love story for the ages, one that would be told and retold by their descendants for generations to come. The story of how he lost his ranch in a fire, she showed up with tools, and together they rebuilt not just a home, but a life filled with more love than either of them had ever dared to dream possible.